Folks, we're here at the Philippine Cultural Center. Just finished up a candidates forum. We had the mayoral, and we had about 18 or 20 candidates running for city council. There's 8 seats. We're honored and privileged to have our guest today, Mr. Mike Maskell.
Yes.
Mike, you're running in the Lynn Haven district, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Real quick, Mike. Sorry. 3-person field. Really like some of the ideas you're talking about. Let's start. Well, let's give the audience some background. You're born and bred in Virginia Beach, correct?
Yes. Well, I wasn't born in Virginia. I was born in California, but lived there for about a week.
Okay.
So all my life I can remember, I've been in Virginia Beach.
And you went to high school here?
Yes, Princess Anne High School, class of '97.
Very nice. And then undergrad?
Yeah, undergrad and graduate school. I went to ODU for my bachelor's and my master's in physics, and then later after that, I went to George Washington University for law school.
Gotcha. And what type of law are you practicing right now?
Well, my primary career is I'm a patent examiner for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So that's not something I do in private practice. I'm a federal employee, and basically I do the other side of the patent prosecution process. I'm the government agent that basically tries to say, no, you shouldn't get a patent for this, and then they argue with me, and then I decide whether or not to grant the patent.
Okay.
And then I telework for that job full time. The patent office itself is in Alexandria, but I telework, and then I also just last year started a small part-time solo law practice where I focus on family law.
Gotcha. And small case lawyer, right, obviously, because you're running for office. Okay. What made you decide to come back down here as opposed to living up in D.C.? I lived in D.C. for 15 years.
Right.
After law school, what made you? Why not just stay in Northern Virginia, D.C. or Maryland, and work close by?
Yeah, well, there are several reasons. I mean, the biggest one is that Virginia Beach is my home. It's where I grew up. It's where my friends and my family are, and there's other factors like the cost of living was crazy high in Northern Virginia. Once I was done with law school and didn't have to live up there anymore, there wasn't any point of staying in that high cost of living area. And, even though there are cheaper places to live than Virginia Beach, like I said, this is my home, and this is where my whole support network is and everything. This is the city that I love. It's carried me through a lot of hard times.
What made you run for politics in this kind of environment of just hostile, zero-sum game, politics? Why now?
Well, for one thing, I found that in city politics, actually, something kind of refreshing that I found is that it doesn't have to be that kind of nasty zero-sum game. In fact, it doesn't have to be partisan at all. Even though it's common knowledge that I'm one of the officers of the Democratic Party locally here, I've been able to run a very nonpartisan campaign that's been drawing support from across the political spectrum, because really when it comes down to it, the city issues are very different from the partisan issues that divide us on a state or a national level. And it really is. It's not a liberal or conservative sort of divide at the city level. It's more of a connected establishment folks versus everyone else kind of divide. And what I found is kind of interesting when we have the divide changed in that way is that I've been able to have folks that would ordinarily never speak to each other come together to help get me elected. Because they're able to agree on city issues, even if they could never agree on state or national issues. And I see this as an opportunity to do something a little bit bigger on sort of a deeper level, and that's to start a dialogue, to start at this place in the local level where we don't have the acrimony, we don't have the wedge issues, and get to the point where we can realize that just because someone's a Democrat or a Republican or whatever doesn't mean you can't talk to them if you're not on that side. And I think that's something even bigger than our city issues that can come out of a campaign like this.
I think a lot of that. I've seen studies and there was someone on the news that talked about millennials don't care about the wedge and those cultural issues as much as like that older generation does, and so these younger folks are more practical. They're more idea driven. Do you find that when you talk to the young folks, even in Virginia Beach?
Yeah, a little bit more. I find that the divides, the partisan divides, do exist there for millennials as they do for everyone else.
Uh,
Human nature hasn't changed from generation to generation. But it's also a general principle that younger generations tend to be more open to change, and they're not as set in their teams and their ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talked about, and what I like the idea of term limits. Can you talk to us about that?
Right. Yeah. Term limits make especially good sense for the city council level because, unlike the state and national level, where there is some benefit to having a long-term, entrenched, powerful congressman or senator, because in Congress or in the General Assembly you have committees, and you have committees that are very powerful, and so the more the states that have senators and congressmen that have been in office for multiple decades, those representatives for those states and districts become more powerful and are able to do more for their states and districts because of that. But that's not the case at the city level. We don't do those committees. We don't. There is no benefit to the city or to any district in the city from having a city council member that's been there for multiple decades. There's no additional influence or power given to that district for having a long-term incumbent for that long. And really, at the city level, we start to see the real dividing difference between executive and legislative functions. Because some of the folks, particularly some incumbents that argue against term limits, their reasoning is that you want to have experienced members on council that are used to how all these deals work, and how the different funds work and everything, and how the bond process works and the VBDA works and everything. But what that's doing is that's conflating the roles of a legislator and an executive. We're not running for city manager. We're running for city council. Our role is not to be the experts. The experts are the city manager and the city staff that produce the initial suggested budget, etc. The role of the city council is not to be the experts. The role of the city council is to be the voice of the people. The role of the city council is to be responsive to what the residents, the voters want. It's not to be the experts. It's to take the information from the experts and make a judgment on it based on what the voters want.
And obviously, you feel like there's that structural, systemic issue going on with city councils in the last, 10, 12 years.
Yeah, well, really, it's a systemic problem that's been there since as long as we've been a city. Because the whole time we've been on, not just with no term limits, but we've also been on at-large voting, which was never supposed to be the permanent situation. And in fact, we've tried to go to district voting before, and some of the same well-connected political forces have been able to torpedo that in the General Assembly even after our city has voted to move to it.
So, okay, so is that something, if you were to propagate that, does that have to go to Richmond?
Yeah, in order to amend the city charter, we have to first have our city council pass a resolution requesting an amendment to our charter, and then the General Assembly has to actually pass an ordinance amending the charter, because our city charter is actually a state Virginia Code law.
So has it ever gotten to Richmond where...
It has gone to Richmond before, and then it was killed in committee.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and what is that? That's going to be that's a political thing, obviously.
That is a political thing.
Okay.
And basically, my plan is, if elected, is to send it back up to Richmond, and this time I'll follow it. I'll go to Richmond with it. I will speak in the General Assembly as a councilman, and if somebody wants to torpedo the will of our voters again in committee, I'll make that a very politically costly thing.
And I like what you said about, I actually own a townhouse in, say, the Bayside District, but I got to be honest, I've not seen the school board member or the city council member that much in that neighborhood. Really,
Right.
I think what you say speaks volumes for even if they were to get a grassroots organization in, say, Bayside, that person could still win with the majority of votes.
Exactly.
Coming from who why would Pungo have any sort of vested issue in what's going on in Northridge?
Right.
Off Virginia Boulevard, for example.
Right, and that's the fundamental problem with the at-large system, as I was saying in the forum. which is that a candidate for Lynn Haven can win Lynn Haven without a single vote from Lynn Haven.
Sure.
So they don't need the votes of the people they're actually representing, and that gets into what I was talking about how the at-large system dilutes the influence of neighborhoods and communities in elections.
But then you have purists that say, well, that makes that person campaign to the whole city, which they will be serving, right? Mm-hmm. Is that the counter argument?
The problem with that is that if you look at the power of each person's vote, if all the seats are voted on at large, your vote for each seat is just one out of over 400,000 in Virginia Beach.
Sure.
On the district level, your vote would be one out of 40 to 60,000.
Sure.
Your vote would be about 10 times more powerful.
Sure.
And the effect becomes even more pronounced when you look at the community level instead of just the individual voters. If you take like a neighborhood or a community that represents 15% of the population, like one example I like to give is SeaTac in the Beach District. The beach representative should not be able to ignore SeaTac and still get reelected.
Right.
Okay. But they're able to,
right?
Because they can get those votes from anywhere else in the
even
city.
if that community was vibrant. I mean, I don't know what their political climate is, but even if they're involved,
right? Even well organized, even if you
right.
can get your whole community together and get your 15% of the population to all go in one direction,
sure,
that would sway the tide in a district race. But at large, one community in one district doing that is not going to turn the tide.
Gotcha.
And there's. That the problem goes way beyond that as well. It goes to the factor of money in elections. It is extremely difficult for a newcomer to get elected
sure.
in the city because I have to campaign to all 400,000 people in the city.
Sure.
It is physically impossible for me to knock on enough doors to that way alone reach enough voters.
Sure.
And not only is the population an issue, but geographically we're a very spread out city.
Right.
Like you look at candidates like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez up in New York. She was able to go to apartment buildings
sure.
and just go door to door. I mean,
yeah.
she could contact 500 voters in an hour.
Right.
That way.
Right.
Not so in Virginia Beach. So having to campaign to the entire city makes it a very daunting task for anyone who's not well connected to even get into it.
And I always made that argument too. At whatever level, whether it's campaign finance or gerrymandering, the incumbents they don't support those changes. They want the status quo because it favors them. Mm-hmm. Hey, Mike. So great talking to you as always. If folks want to volunteer or if they want to donate money to your campain, mm-hmm. where do they go? Do you have a Facebook site?
I do. I have a Facebook group and I have a Facebook page as well. If you just look for Mike Maskell for City Council. I also have a website, www.ilikemike.org. That's the easier way to remember. And
gotcha.
That has a link on it to my Facebook page as well as to my donation site if you want to make a contribution.
Okay. And any upcoming events for you, Mike, that folks can see at or engage with you?
Let's see. Next week we have the Hospitality Industry Forum at the Sandler Center.
Okay.
That's going to be on, I think, Wednesday.
All right.
That's the next one, I think.
Good stuff. Hey, Mike, well, we appreciate you coming out to us, seeing us over here at the PCC, and we will see you on the campaign trail. November 6th, guys. Check out all the races. Make find out what these guys are running on, mm-hmm. and make your decision. Global Pinoy Series, Philippine Cultural Center. We are done for tonight, I think.